And then let me just do a quick little test here.
Testing.
All right. Go ahead and talk, Dad.
Testing, this is testing.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Sounds good.
Yeah, and how about you, Jake?
Jake Pollmann texting.
Yep, it's all good.
Cool. Here, how about now? Not leaning in, is that still good?
It's not as good.
Okay, I'll lean in.
So if
then.
you need to, just take and hold it, because you're not on camera.
Sweet.
Like you just take it out of the thing.
Alrighty.
Cool. So I'll just hit record and get out of the way.
Okay, here we go.
You recording on your video?
I am recording on my video. Alright, so when were you born, Grandpa?
I was born December 17th, 1940. I was born in Culbertson, Nebraska, at my grandmother's house. And my great aunt Lena was in attendance to my birth. So a lot of kids at that time were born at home.
Mm-hmm. How many people lived in your hometown?
About 600 people lived in the town, and now there's, I think, even less than that.
What was your high school graduating class size?
Class size, we had 10 in our graduating class. So there was 6 girls and 4 boys.
What was life like in rural America during the 1950s?
Well, it was a lot different than today. For instance, well, up until I was about 10 years old, we didn't have any electricity, or we didn't have any running water. You know, the outhouse was out in the yard and stuff. You know, we had kerosene lamps and gas lamps for lighting, stuff like that. And when I was about 10, when we got electricity, we didn't have any TV until I was about 15 or 16 when we first had TV. So a lot different than today. We lived out quite a distance out in the country, so we'd get to town usually, you know, every Saturday night. You know, everybody would go to town and get groceries and stuff like that. But it was a lot of fun.
Did you have any hobbies?
Yeah, I did, you know, a lot. I liked horseback riding. We always had horses. We lived along a creek, so that had a lot of fishing. Went fishing a lot of times, and stuff like that. And then I like to tinker with things. You know, my brother and I, we used to take the lawnmower motor apart and put it back together, and things like that. So,
Did you have any chores you had to do?
we had a lot of chores. You know, in fact, I didn't play any sports because my dad said, you got to come home and work on, you know, do the chores and stuff. We always had cows to milk and hogs to feed and chickens, and then, you know, during the summer and fall, and especially at harvest time, there was a lot of work to do that had to help out with. So it kept me busy most of the time.
What do you remember about the Korean War or the Cold War?
Don't remember a whole lot. I mean, it was a lot different than today. You know, back then, when you did hear news, it was kind of old news. You know, it took a while before the news got there. Where, you know, today it's like news 24/7. You know, everything that happens, you almost instantly hear about it and stuff. I think the biggest thing that I remember is during that time there was a lot of concern that, you know, it might start a world war, you know, with nuclear war and stuff like that. So a lot of people then were building fallout shelters, you know, where they could, underground shelters where they could go in the ground in case there was a nuclear attack, stuff. And that's the thing I guess I remember the most about that time period.
What kind of music did you listen to, and how did you listen to your music?
Well, a lot of music, you know, rock and roll. There was those days Elvis Presley, you know, players like that, you know. We also, you know, Nat King Cole, some of the soul music and stuff. We had most of the music you listen to on the radio and the stations, or you could buy the phonograph records. I didn't have one until I started college. Some of the people had that, so you buy the music on the records and stuff. Didn't have internet, so you couldn't surf the internet or anything at that time. So
What was big news you remember other than the war, and how did you get your news?
well, the news mostly was, you get a lot of the local news, and usually a local newspaper that had the news. A lot of the at night, especially some of the radio stations, would broadcast, kind of world news stuff. Once in a while you listen to the BBC broadcast, on the shortwave radio and stuff. But again, like I say, it wasn't 24/7 news like there is today.
How did you get to and from school every day?
Well, when I first started up through the 8th grade, we went to a country school, which was about 2 miles from our place. Most of the time we walked to school. It was a one-room country school. We had one teacher, and it was all the grades, like 1 through 8. It was usually about 15, 20 kids and stuff, and so we walked. Then when I started at the 9th grade, going to town, I started driving then. In fact, that's when we started driving the Chrysler, drive the Chrysler to school, and my brother and sister and 2 other the neighbors would ride with us, and we were about maybe 10 miles from town. So I had a driver's license to drive to and from school, and that's how I got there. So
What was a typical school day like when you were in high school?
it was busy. We'd had different classes, and at lunch break, and of course, then after school, we have sports and so forth. We had other activities. I think I was in about 4 or 5 different plays that we had at the school and the high school. I was in the Glee Club, stuff like that. So.
What was different about school during the hunting season?
Everybody was talking about the birds they shot and getting out of there. In fact, later on in probably when I was junior and senior, some of us at lunchtime, we'd be able to get out and maybe go out in the country and shoot a few pheasants, stuff before we went back to school. So.
Did you watch TV, and what did you watch on the TV?
Well, like I say, when I was about 15 or 16, when we first had TV, the TV was it was real snowy a lot of times, especially if it was like a little rainy or foggy or something like that. You could barely see it, and the TV was only from about 8 o'clock in the morning until 7 or 8 o'clock at night, and then the rest of the time they would be broadcasting a test pattern. And there's a lot of what I call soap opera kind of things. Some news, some programs. Like Lawrence Welk was on. That was a big popular thing. Some of the other shows like that everybody crowd around to watch.
And then are there any other questions I should have asked you?
Oh, I think you did a pretty good job of answering questions. I guess one of the things I was gonna mention is in growing up. When I was born, my folks lived in like a 3-bedroom house. They had a kitchen, a living room, and a bedroom. No indoor plumbing or anything. My mother said that that winter, when it was so cold, they had a kitchen stove was a coal-fired stove. They stoke up the stove real warm, set the bassinet on the oven door, and that'd keep me warm at night. Stuff. So that was kind of interesting. She was telling me about that. So a little different than it is today.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much. That's all the questions I got.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks for the interview, Jake.
Yeah.